Welcome to the Blue Mind podcast, a vision to transform the lives of 1 billion men. We explore various topics related to male identity, and we invite people here to discuss important issues that affect men in today's society.
We've got a brand new episode for you. I'm Mark, Ed's here, and we are absolutely delighted to have a special guest this week. Somebody that is doing extraordinary things in West Sussex in terms of bringing men together, creating a safe, non-judgmental environment, walking out in nature, opening men's hearts, conversations. Joe Horton, welcome to the Blue Mind channel. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this evening's conversation.
Awesome. So just to give you a bit of a feel for how I heard about the Guild of Dads and Joe. So spending a large amount of time in East Grinstead in West Sussex, my sister-in-law, she tagged my name in one of Joe's posts in a Facebook group, and as somebody that's committing to positive behavioral change, specifically for men, my own, other people that we're coaching, mentoring at the moment, I was extremely curious about what this other person in East Grinstead is doing. Exchanged some messages with Joe, jumped into a WhatsApp group, absolutely blown away by what he's doing, by getting not just a handful of people together, but multiple men together every few weeks for a beautiful walk in the Ashdown Forest. Is that correct?
Yeah, Ashdown Forest. Yeah,
Ashdown Forest. Yeah, it's amazing, absolutely
Beautiful
amazing
place, yeah.
location. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Ed, would you like to start by any questions that you might have for Joe in terms of the work that he's doing, or perhaps Joe, just kind of jumping the gun a little bit, Joe, perhaps you would like to give a bit of an intro into the specifics and the nuance in terms of what you are doing, what the vision is for Guild of Dads, and ultimately how people can hear more about it.
Yeah. So basically, I started doing this kind of work, if you like. I have a day job as well, but my old man passed away in 2015, and in the aftermath of that, I kind of went through like a period of sort of self-reflection, discovery, if you like, and like probably a lot of guys, I had. If you were to look at me, you'd say, well, objectively, he's got a wife, kids, he's got a good job, good income, goes on holidays, all this kind of stuff and that. But in the aftermath of my old man passing away, I was kind of going through this phase where I was like, well, what does this mean for me? I'm like halfway through my life. I'm 36. What does the future hold for me? Am I going to be doing just my day job, or am I going to be doing something more impactful? Is this really just it, sort of thing? And probably about a couple of years after that, I was listening to a podcast while I was driving along in my car. A guy called Jordan Harbinger. He was interviewing a guy called Ryan Mickler in the US who runs Order of Man, and he was talking about this brotherhood, online brotherhood for guys, which had like a plan that men could make in terms of 4 specific areas of their lives: physical health, mental health, relationships, and contribution. And it was something that I thought, well, I'll give it a go for a month or so. I stayed in it for 18 months, but it was kind of transformational for me, just being in that environment, that growth orientated environment with other men, also being held accountable and actually doing some kind of ruthless sort of self-examination in terms of, what I wanted to be doing and where I wanted to be going. So, and it was in the aftermath of that kind of Guild of Dads was really kind of born, in the sense of I initially started doing a podcast, which is now into about 80 episodes. I've interviewed some of the world's top psychologists, relationship experts on masculinity. And so that's kind of broadened my knowledge base of what I know about men and how I can help men. And then I also started my own online community called the Guild of Dads Brotherhood, I coach guys, and I also run the Guild of Dads hike, which is a monthly hike which goes out on the Ashdown Forest. And really, it's really funny because I don't see myself as like a savior of men, but I think that we all have experiences of life, and we've learned from our own experiences. And I think that what's a real shame is that often we don't pass back that roadmap to other people. We just kind of like, oh, we know what we're doing, or we've worked out a little bit about what we're doing, and we kind of forget about the people that are a few steps behind us that would really benefit from a lot of the what we've learned. And sometimes a lot of what guys learn is actually kind of counterintuitive to conventional wisdom as well, particularly when it comes to relationships, masculinity, accountability, leadership, all these different things. They're kind of in this kind of shrouded in this veil of mystery. And then when you kind of crack the egg and start looking underneath the bonnet a little bit more, you realize actually there's a lot more to this than meets it's the eye. And I think as I get older, in terms of my kind of vision for where Guild of Dads is going, I think it kind of revolves around the journey, as I would call it, which is actually getting guys to saddle up for their own journey of self-discovery, whatever that may well be, because for every single bloke, it's going to be different, and you only have to look at, say, exercise as a good example of that. Some guys like doing running or cycling or ultras or whatever. Some guys, they get their hits from doing lifting or CrossFit or something like that. So it's really kind of horses for courses, and recognizing that all guys are different. They have different belief systems, different value systems, and it's how I think that we can really get guys to explore what is actually possible for them, rather than this kind of narrow sort of view of their lives that maybe they've kind of fallen into. And I think that one of the biggest, and I said this, I think when I was talking in message when we were messaging back and forth, one of the biggest enemies for guys is actually the status quo. And it's not, and I'm not talking about a 70s rock group here. I'm talking about stuff just being the same, because there's a reason why books aimed at men, like, for instance, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, there's so many books around meaning and purpose. And I think a lot of the modern world and our experience of the modern world has sucked meaning and purpose out of men's lives. And then everyone's scratching their heads thinking, well, why are men so bloody miserable? And why are guys topping themselves? And why this and why that? But no one really wants to have the difficult conversation that you have to have in order to get onto the other side of this,
Spot on.
Yeah.
Absolutely spot on in my opinion. I absolutely loved what you were saying about the brotherhood, committing to that process, the fact that you were willing to be impacted by somebody else, and this idea, this image of men saddling in for their own growth journey. Do you know, when I heard that, I was like, gosh, it's so true, isn't it? Because I found over the last 6 years that at times, sometimes you feel, oh, I figured it all out. I figured it all out. I'm absolutely wicked. I've grown this much in a couple of years. I'm set. And then something happens, and you're like, oh, no, definitely not. Okay. So the fact that I'm definitely going to stick with that. I really like that notion. Ed, what came up for you while listening to Joe's intro?
Well, absolutely a great intro, and I think the just a man's search for meaning, right, to coin the book, but the fact that we now accept that men have their own personal search for some kind of purpose and meaning, which maybe now men are recognizing is a thing that they can explore themselves, and it's not just by doing stuff and being a dad and going to work, but there's actually a light bulb that goes on. There's a question mark that is risen. And now I think, like with Joe's community, he's giving people, he's highlighting that this is a thing, and it's okay for men to invest in time to explore themselves, what their purpose is, and I'm sorry to hear about your father. Ultimately, when something like that happens, I think my observation from the conversations I've had with men, this lack of meaning, this what's it all about, people die, unfortunately, and and suddenly we're left feeling a bit, midlife. What are we doing? And I think if we're not emotionally conscious and we're not having these conversations about love and about need and about what's it all about, because men don't maybe feel so comfortable to go into that philosophical kind of discussion, then of course it needs to come out eventually. And unfortunately, it comes out when something quite challenging happens. So I think my question would be, I can understand why you set it up. The men that are coming to you, are they coming to you with, I just want to share? Is the narrative, I know I feel there's more, I'm a bit stuck, or you're not getting to that level of conversation when you meet people?
I think that guys are feeling stuck, and I think that and kind of backtracking a bit on what you just said there, I think that in terms of kind of midlife, it's a bit of a misnomer midlife, because none of us know when we're going to pop our clogs. But let's just say the period after we become fathers, and that kind of encompasses that kind of that time scale. I think that a lot of guys, I think that we have this kind of maybe slightly infantilized view of, we're going to settle down, we're going to get married, have kids, get a house, maybe go on some holidays, get a decent car, and that at some point we're going to reach a point where we've arrived, B, figured things out, and C, have reached a level of satisfaction, accomplishment, joy, happiness, whatever you want to call it. And I think what comes as a shock is when guys get to this point and they think, shit, I should have, I've arrived. I'm here. I'm at this point. And then there's that kind of sinking feeling in their stomach, which is kind of, it's not, and what's really weird is it's not necessarily an emotion, like kind of when life feels a bit meaningless, it's not an emotion, it's kind of like a nagging feeling in your kind of solar plexus that it's very difficult to articulate. And because I think it's difficult for guys to articulate, it becomes difficult for them to talk about. And so, and in terms of what we were talking,
do you think women feel the same, or do you think because they have different community infrastructure and they're better at sharing, that they don't have this, they can express it as they go and resolve it as they go? And or is it more to do with like acceptance and gratitude and more of a spiritual kind of thing of because there's a lot there, right? Why and I've had those feelings. I think we all have feelings where we will get up some days and think, gosh, this is heavy, right? This is a and how do we get that feeling of peace of mind, right? And being content and being satisfied with who we are as people, our contribution to the world and our family, and it's that kind of the skills that we're trying to learn. It's how do you impart that to someone who comes and says, I just don't feel like it's all fitting together very well. Complex, right?
Yeah, I mean,
there's about 10 questions and points in that, but just go with it.
That's all right.
Pick one you want to respond to.
Well, I pondered this when I was in the car today, because you do ponder stuff as you're driving along, and I don't think women ever walk in the park either. And the reason I say that is that although men statistically are the higher percentage in terms of taking their own lives, depression is actually higher in women. So there's a kind of disparity there. But in terms of let's say the average middle-aged woman, I think that they are self-medicating and sedating themselves against thought, feeling, and emotion in a not too different way to what men are. So our generation, and I loosely say our generation, we've grown up with booze and drugs and stuff. That I think there's a real issue with middle-aged people drinking to sedate their thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I think that is a learned behavior that we all learn from getting shit-faced from our teens through our 20s. And it's a bit like, the way I put it is, it's a bit like trying to operate a 2023 PC with a Windows 1995 operating system. It just keeps crashing. And I think people, men and women, arrive at this point in midlife where they keep having these crashes because they're using a set of skills and tools that they developed in their youth to anesthetize thought, feeling, and emotion, and they keep using that to plaster over the cracks, and until such point as it doesn't work, and then you're faced with a real stark reality. You can either keep running and using these things in order to run away from stuff, or you can turn and face what I would loosely call the man in the mirror. And that's a hard thing for people to do. And I think that when you said about how do you get guys on board, and sometimes guys are a bit reluctant to get on board with the journey, as it were. I think this is what they're wrestling with, because no one has ever held, no one has ever gotten to stand and look in the mirror at themselves and say, right, who am I? What am I? What do I want? And all these kind of things. And quite often what you find in the modern world is when you do hold up the mirror to someone, they shoot the person that's holding up the mirror, because you're just like, how could you say such a thing? I'm not that person like that. And because it's triggering the hell out of them, because their ego is screaming. Their ego is so triggered by what they're seeing and what they're hearing that they get annoyed with the person that is actually pointing out to them. And this is kind of why I think you see quite a lot of vitriol maybe online sometimes, because people are kind of shooting the messenger in some respects, because their ego is just, there's such a cognitive dissonance going on inside their head as to what they're hearing and what they're seeing, and they're like, shit, this guy's right, wow, and then their ego's going, I can't accept this.
Acceptance being the key word there. We talk about this on a regular basis. I know this was definitely valid or present in my situation, where there was a moment 2 weeks post divorce where I was in complete victim mentality, blaming ex-wife for everything. How could she do that? Ego is on fire, absolutely on fire. And I can just remember coming out the shower, looking at myself, like, oh shit, how have I put on so much weight? Well, because you've been eating pizza every day and drinking a bottle of red wine for 2 weeks, right? And this whole, there's some really good mirror work out there. Things like, and they all works. Like if you look at yourself, if you actually take some time, look at yourself in the mirror, in the actual mirror, and have a little word with yourself, there will be that element of acceptance. But the reality is that, and I see it on a regular basis with the men that reach out to us, right? And I know it's the same for you, Ed, and it's probably the same for you, Joe, where some guys will reach out, they've hit that. Joe, I think you put this beautifully in terms of that parachute that you talk about, where if you could just explain that for a little bit. You've got a lovely little saying that you have about guys tend not to ask for help until that situation. If you could just explain that.
Yeah, guys don't pull the ripcord on their parachute until they're about to hit the ground. And it could be coming home and their bags are packed by the front door because their wife's walked out. It could be being resuscitated on the floor because they've had a heart attack. It could be getting sacked from their job because they've just been a shit sort of thing. And I think expanding on that kind of parachute analogy, like and we again, before we came on air, we were talking about how there is quite a lot of pressure on men to talk about how they're feeling. Like if you're falling from a plane, hurtling towards the ground at 120 miles an hour, you don't want to talk about parachutes. You want someone to either fucking give you a parachute or to show you how to make a parachute. And I think this speaks to the experience of men in the sense that, like, often, okay, talking does have its place, but when you are in a dire situation, you need to take action in doing something. And I think that this is one of the misgivings I have about the men's mental health discussion, that talking will get you so far, but then you have to take action to address the things in your life that are causing you pain and causing you issues. And I think that's a difficult part where the rubber hits the road for a lot of guys, because they're like, am I ready to do this, or is it
So Joe, why are men waiting for the parachute to hit the ground? Why do men need, not all men of course, but this lack of proactivity around recognizing there's something going on, not taking criticism or feedback particularly well, maybe self-sabotaging and burying your head in the sand, and then when it's all a bit too late, as you said, either their partner's checked out, and then they think, oh, or something else has happened. Then they realize, oh my God, I'm in crisis. I need help. What is the question? Is why are we not acting earlier when we know something feels wrong? And is that just a lack of communication skills? Is we don't have the skills to be vulnerable? We just don't think it's a coping mechanism. It's not important. What's your thoughts on that? Compared to women, and of course, there's always different examples. We shouldn't be gender specific, but it does feel to me that men don't tend to proactively manage crisis. And that's certainly my circumstance. I just sort of ignored it for 10 years until it was all far too late. And I think that feels like a common thread in masculinity. And it feels like women are better at managing it as they go, is my hypothesis. Is that how would you respond to that?
It's interesting. It's a telling statistic that something like 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and it causes a lot of heated arguments, that statistic. But I think it does indicate that guys have this, oh, I think everything's okay and everything's fine, when in actual fact the reality is something completely different from the other side of the table. Why is that? I think it's role models, if I'm really honest. The example set by, I'm not going to rubbish our fathers or the baby boomer generation or or our grandparents, but I just don't think there's a very good example set by generations that have come before us in terms of how to kind of actually ruthlessly examine where we are and where we're going. And like, typically when you're like, marriage is a prime example. Like, you'll say to guys, oh, how's things going? Oh, it's okay, everything's fine. And you're like, so what does that actually mean? When you guys know as well as I do that when you speak to a lot of guys who say that their marriage is fine, you'll often find out that they've not had sex with their wife in 6 months. They never go on date nights. They're arguing about everything under the sun, and it's far from fine. And you're like, but if their barometer for marriage, for instance, and that's just one aspect of life, if their barometer for it is what their mum and dad's marriage was like, if their mum and dad's marriage was actually pretty shit, but they stayed married for their whole lives, then their barometer is kind of quite low. So I think there's an element where guys kind of just make do with how things are being just okay. But when you actually sort of say to them, well, actually, what would it look like if stuff was exceptional? What would it look like if you were really enjoying this experience? Or what would it look like if it was thriving or a bit more than okay? Oh, well.
Do you think as a culture, then applies to both partners, do you think as a culture, when kids come along married for a while, that it's just this kind of, it's just we expect marriage to be like this, and we don't strive for an excellent relationship and great communication and great intimacy, mostly because we don't have the skills to do those things, and therefore there's the kind of, oh, it's just the way it is, we've got a family, it's just hard, and I just accept it, and it's kind of, it's a detachment. It's kind of, oh well, everyone else is saying the same thing in the pub, so it's just the way it is, right? You mentioned having sex every 6 months, and I'm pretty sure the wife and partner is probably having the same concerns, that their relationship could be better. I certainly know in my experience it could have been a better relationship, when it was there, and I personally didn't have the skills, the awareness, the consciousness, the responsibility, the accountability, or even the thought process to be able to detach myself from a bad relationship to know that I was responsible to improve it. So what I'm saying in that, I guess, is that women have had the same parents. I mean, they've had the same experiences of whether their mums are giving them better insight than the fathers are giving them, I don't know. Maybe that's a point, but it seems that there's in that, if we're talking about relationships, there's what we're trying to say here. There's perhaps a different way of accepting average, and maybe women are less tolerant. Maybe they accept average because of the family and the kids, and it feels to me like they want better than average. And it often feels to me like it's the men that maybe are not willing to go to those conversations. And frankly, which couple is going to say, our relationship's not very good, we need to do something about it. But that's what a conscious relationship should be.
Yeah, and it's I think maybe women are maybe expecting that actually by this point in evolution that men are kind of becoming a bit more evolved men in terms of stuff. But the thing is what's the example that we're set? A lot of man's of validation is from his ability to provide. Generally, historically, that has been to provide financially. And I think some men fall into what I would loosely call breadwinner complacency syndrome, which is like, I'm bringing home the bacon. What more does she want? No, actually, she wants you to connect with her like women need connection. And if you're not connecting with her on an emotional and, mental level and even a spiritual level, they're going to check out. And so I think there is, there is definitely kind of an element of that. And again, our forefathers have set the bar quite low in that respect. Typically as well, what a lot of guys do, Mark mentioned just about, in terms of the kind of blame thing, often when relationships on the rocks, it's like, well, she's got to do something. We've got to do this together. And if she's not going to work at it, then I'm not going to work at it. And it becomes this kind of like Mexican standoff as to who's going to move first. Now, I know in terms of guys that once they start working on themselves, then it has kind of like a domino effect in other areas of their life. So like Mark, I've heard Mark talk about exercise, for instance. Like once guys start getting themselves in shape, then they're like, oh, actually, shit, I can run 5Ks. I can do a half marathon. I can do a marathon, just using running as an example. But then it kind of opens up the possibilities in their head, actually. Well, if I can do that physically, what about my self-care? Oh, I could maybe do these things. Or what about my relationship? So it begins to have like this kind of domino effect. And some guys really kind of are so bothered about waiting for their wife to make the first move instead of just leading, controlling what they can control, improving themselves and allowing their wife to come along for the journey, because she wants to go on a journey with you. She wants to go on an adventure with you. And she's waiting for you to lead. Like leadership has become a bit of a dirty word when it comes to relationships. And I'm not going to rubbish feminism and whatever and stuff, but I think guys have kind of fallen back into this default position of, well, I don't need to lead because my wife's in charge of the kind of that side of things. So they become kind of quite passive, and it kills attraction between men and women when that happens. Like I listen to quite a few podcasts with women, funny enough, because I just find it interesting. And categorically, they are all saying we'd prefer if we'd like our guys to step up, to lead, to take responsibility, to plan some days out, to make me feel safe, secure, loved, validated. There's probably about 8 to 10 things which aren't actually very difficult things to do. That women are kind of craving right now, and guys are like, there was a.
Would you say then that the identity of that leadership role is that somehow we've culturally persuaded ourselves that it's an equal partnership, and therefore the attractiveness of leading and decision making and competence, which I would define as masculine things, maybe they're feminine as well, who knows, right? But I do think I would agree with you on that. I think there's a general hypothesis that I have that women appreciate those qualities in a man, and somehow we've got ourselves into a place where men are almost a bit timid to accept that and step up. And maybe because they want to embrace feminism, they want to be, maybe women are confused by what they're actually asking for. And I also think that's a problem. So if for guys listening to this, what would we say to guide them that if they're in that slunk and they're sitting there in this situation where something's not right, what do they do next, Joe, in your mind?
So if you don't mind, Ed, could you just make a note of that question, because it is a really good question. But for me, this is a really important point, because I love what's being discussed around the healthy masculine and leading from a healthy perspective. You touched on a point, Ed, around, do women actually, there was a film, wasn't it, What Women Want? Do women actually know themselves what they want? Because in my experience, it doesn't feel like they did. In terms of what you were saying, Joe, I think it's great that you're listening to podcasts. And like you say, there's some quite it sounds so simple, but there's some really good areas there. If a couple of guys were aware of that, then they would dramatically improve their relationship. From what I observe, from what I see, this sense of entitlement and being so attached to outcomes or defining the feminine side, defining themselves as the physical. So so much investment in looks and this type of thing. I'm curious to hear how you guys view that and what your experiences of that. Do you feel that, because we've touched on men and purpose, and they feel stuck because they don't know what they want and they don't want to know what their meaning and purpose is that the same for women? Do you feel that women actually know what they want as well, from a human perspective, not in terms of the extrinsic stuff? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think in answer to your question, I think that both men and women have gone through a period where they have been led by the shoulds rather than the wants. And what I mean by that is that women, probably since I guess the 1960s, have been told how they should be and what they should want. And men exactly the same, they've been told how they should be and how they should want. And the problem is that in this area of shoulds, it takes us further and further away from what we want and how we naturally are. And we hear a lot of people talking about you know nature versus nurture and social reconstruction, and we're gonna remodel the world as in a certain way that people want it to be. But when I speak to evolutionary biologists and evolutionary psychologists, we've evolved over thousands and thousands of years. So the idea that we're going to suddenly change our biological and psychological development and how we are in the space of what 80 odd no, it's not even 80 odd years, it's 64 years since the beginning of the 1960s. The idea that we're going to change how men and women are just by social reconstruction is quite frankly kind of madness. And the problem is it's working against how we naturally are. And there's a brilliant book called The Way of the Superior Man by David Dada. Very, very good book. And he talks about masculine and feminine sexual polarity. And he says that in all relationships, you need to have, even in homosexual relationships as well as heterosexual relationships, you have to have a masculine and feminine polarity. And the way he describes it is that if you think of a magnet, if you have the attracting poles, they draw each other together in like a magnetic energy. But if you've got two opposing poles, like a masculine and a masculine, they're repelling one another. And the same as if it's a feminine and a feminine. And the issue with modern relationships is that women are quite often in the modern world adopting a lot of masculine characteristics, and sometimes men are adopting feminine characteristics. And the problem is in relationships, it begins to repel. They repel one another. And the classic example of this is if you have like a like a career woman who's, for instance, having to adopt quite a lot of masculine characteristics in her corporate job, then comes home, and then she's got to somehow get in touch with her feminine side in order to to be attractive to her
Yes.
husband or partner. And the modern world doesn't seem to account for this. It's just like, yeah, we're all kind of like homogenous, we're all the same, and therefore we should be treated the same, behave the same. But it just really doesn't take any account of evolution and how we've got to the point in which we are now, my tuppence worth.
Wow. I mean,
what about you, Ed?
Well, I think, culture, society has put women in a very challenging situation where their expectations on them to be, a wife, a husband, a mother, a career person. I mean, I think in many ways, plus they have the biological challenges of monthly menstruation and obviously menopause. I mean, I've started to think a lot more sympathetically about what women have to go through. And, you know, men are clearly having a tough time in different ways. And the answer to all of this is for men to understand women's situation and for women to hopefully try and understand where the man or masculinity sits. And I think both sexes are under different pressures, and I think it's cultural, it's historical, and I think it's exacerbated by different skill sets that men don't have and women do have. And I think ultimately what we're looking for is for both sexes to level up their vulnerability, communication, investment in the relationship, being able to express what ultimately some very, very complex social needs that they put on themselves. And I always come back to essentially, well, if you're in a relationship, there has to be a lot of investment in it. And I worry, certainly my own experience, that we're not as families investing the time to really understand what two individuals need as they go through the sort of life cycle towards, you know, through family, middle age, or the autumn periods. And, you know, there's an underlying massive pressure on time for people. There's an issue around, frankly, middle age being a turning point where people start to think about mortality, and obviously losing your parents is a massive impact, Joe, and I'm sure you feel that on how we value life. And all these things, menopause, very complex situations, need a lot of discussion and listening. And I think that's, to me, and it's not really answering the question, Mark, but I think it's the crux of it. If healthy relationships are not ending up divorced, has got to be is one of the objectives. Whether you end up staying married or not is kind of not the point. The point is, whilst you're in a relationship, is to be your best version of yourself in that relationship. And who knows where it'll end. We simply, I think the idea we all expect to be married forever is probably fallen by the wayside now. Yes, it's an ideal, and we hope that, but the place to start is on understanding that in the relationship between men and women, we're very different. We have different social pressures, different concerns, different moods, different skills, and investing in that relationship to understand the point of view of the other person. And for some reason, when we talk about men, I think, going back to what we're originally talking about, they need to own their participation in that conversation more than we do. And that, I don't know why that is, and I think we're getting better at it. It's responsibility, really. It's like, I'm part of this, and I need to change some of the stuff that I'm doing to make this thing work better. That's just a load of random thoughts. I don't know whether it kind of was coherent to what we were talking about, but I think the problem with this gender debate, and I feel it very acutely, is that we're trying to talk about male traits, masculine and feminine, but at the same time, we don't want to stereotype, because everyone's got, you know, nuances and everything else. And I try and go back to ultimately what's best for a couple or what's best for an individual, like whether you're a man or a woman. But we have to accept we're different, and that's just nature, and it's nonsense to pretend otherwise, really. To go back to you, Joe, your thing, are you seeing, again, in confidence, when these guys are coming to you, are they coming after a crisis? Are they coming to be proactive?
Some are proactive, some are crisis as well. So sometimes I've had guys where literally they've been to see various different counselors, their marriage has been on the rocks and whatever, and I've kind of guided them through information that is going to be helpful to them, that they can kind of work on. And I've mentioned, obviously, David Dada, The Way of the Superior Man. There's a handful of really excellent books that guys can look at. One of them is Robert Glover's No More Mr. Nice Guy, which I shared with Mark this week, which I would go as far as to say that's probably one of the books that should be given to 18-year-old men when they leave school, such as its power in terms of really reflecting on how you get your validation and how you can be an integrated man. And I think that the word that's the word that Robert Glover uses quite a lot in his books, is an integrated man rather than a nice guy that gets his validation from just doing stuff for other people all the time. But yeah, in answer to your question, it's some are proactive, some are not. Some have maybe kind of hit an impasse in their careers and they want to change, and they just need the accountability and the kind of guidance to get through that kind of hump and out of their rut sort of thing. Some, it could even be that they've had health issues and they're trying to get back into exercise or whatever. But I think what's useful for guys is to actually put a little bit of pressure on themselves to actually show up for themselves first and foremost, because like I say to guys, look, you need to put yourself first and then prioritize what's important to you. And then obviously sometimes dads find that a really difficult thing to get their head around. They're like, well, does that mean surely that means being selfish? And I'm like, well, no, it means putting your oxygen mask on first, because you're not any good use to anyone if you've died from asphyxiation on the plane. But on a deeper level, what that practically means is actually, well, working out, what you want, where you're going, what your vision for your future is going to be in accordance with, what you value. And there's various, online tests you can do to work out what you do actually value. And then begin to kind of live in accordance with that. Because I think for a lot of men, it's a bit like, when you go to the osteopath and they're like, you're out of alignment and that's what's causing you pain. I think a lot of guys are living kind of out of alignment. So it could be that, they're adopting again, coming back to shoulds, they're adopting the values that they think they should have, and the values that their parents had, so they should have. And
and then those, and I'm sure you do, maybe you won't agree, but I would suspect that what's important to each individual man, that self-discovery, that journey, what their purpose is, can be very different. It may be to be the best husband, to be a good dad. It may be to be great at your business. It may be to be an age winning triathlete or a whatever it is. And I don't think it's not prescriptive, is it? It's about investing in the time that they can understand what really matters when they meet their maker, as we all will. What kind of legacy? What do they want to be known as? It's all these kind of things. And so, what would you say back to the sort of questions? If you are a man or a woman, right, who is struggling to identify purpose, what 3 tips would you give them, Joe, to maybe get back on track, if I may?
I think the main thing is to kind of create a vision of what you want your life to look like. And some people do that by values first. Some people just grab a sheet of paper, write down, in the distinct areas of your life that are most important to you, relationships, physical health, mental health, what you're contributing to the world. And actually take some time to really kind of think about that. And it might not be that the answers come to you first, straight away.
Would you advise time on their own or time with other men? Because I'm a big fan of the former, but let me hear your answer.
I think the problem is when you do it as a group setting, then you can become infected by other people's agendas, and you can take on what their ideas are rather than what your own ideas are. I think I kind of agree with, if I've just heard you right, I kind of agree with what you said in terms of time alone, because I think that like a lot of my ideas and insights come, for instance, when I'm on my bike or when I'm walking or when I have time by myself, because my creative brain goes into overdrive. So that's helpful. Another helpful way to look at it is to write your own eulogy. Imagine that you're standing up at the lectern at your own funeral or service or whatever it's going to be, and you're talking about your life. How do you want to be remembered? And
very powerful.
Again, it focuses the mind in terms of what is important to you, or what you want to be remembered for as important to you. So those are the first 2 things. 1 is make a vision for the different areas of your life. 2 is write your own eulogy. And the advanced thing is to actually go online, find a values questionnaire. They're pretty readily available. I think there's one on the Dr. John DeMartini website is a good one. He's really hot on values. and just work out what you value, and maybe strain your visions through what you value, because then you kind of double filter it a little bit. Your values can change as well. Sometimes people think that values stay the same ad infinitum, but they don't. They can change. And what you might value as a 20-year-old guy, you don't value as a 35-year-old dad, and you don't value as like a retired man in their 60s. So values change. And I think it's important to understand that. I think the other thing as well, kind of as an umbrella to this, is people sort of procrastinate and talk themselves out about from change because they think it's going to be this kind of linear journey that's kind of perfect and in a nice little neat little square that you can file away, and it's going to have distinct stages that you go through and stuff. Change is kind of like, it's like that. It's like choppy waves. You know, it's all over the place. It's messy. It's getting dirty. It's fucking things up. It's misjudging things. It's getting things wrong. And I think it's a willingness to just say, you know, Mark's a rugby guy. It's a willingness to get your face in the dirt and get roughed up a little bit along the way, and realize that you actually might have to change things up along the way. There's a brilliant video by Jordan Peterson on YouTube called I think it's Stumbling into the Light. It's about 7 minutes long, but he talks about this, how once you start moving, you can begin to see where it is you want to be going. And as you kind of traverse on your journey, you might realize that actually, no, the destination point is not there, it's over there. And so you need to change your trajectory and stuff. But the point is, you can't get an idea of where you're going until you actually start moving. And
100%.
And I kind of coined, after I'd read Man's Search for Meaning, I coined something which I call the meaning equation, which is vision plus action equals meaning. So when you begin to start making a vision in different areas of your life, then you take action on that. And it's that journey of going from vision to action, and going on that journey, saddling up for the journey, as we discussed. That's what gives life meaning, I think. I don't think it's arriving at a destination. I don't think it's an end point. I think it's actually just saying, right, okay, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to do stuff, and it might not be right, and I might not be heading for the right destination at the moment, but at least I'm doing something. And that can be an overarching wide vision that encompasses your whole life, or it could be as simple as I used the example of building a garden shed before. You know, you decide you're going to build a garden shed, that's your vision, you go and build it. Okay, you fuck up along the way and use the wrong tools and shit. And then when you finished it, you're like, oh, actually, that looks not too bad. And that was a meaningful experience doing. I feel like I've done something rather than just sitting there doing nothing. And it can be as simple as those little things of, you know, particularly if you're feeling depressed or anxious or down or whatever, a little thing that, right, I'm going to get up this morning, I'm going to make my bed, I'm going to have lunch, and then I'm going to go for a 2-hour walk, or whatever it's going to be that gets you moving into a place of action. Because I'm not saying that you should run around like a headless chicken all the time and be running away from your problems, because that also creates problems. But I do think that an element of action gives meaning to men's lives, and gives them a sense of accomplishment, purpose, and having done something worthwhile. And when we're in a bad place, and when we're in a funk, and when we feel shit about ourselves, that's the last thing that we want to do. But that is the very thing that we need to do.
Very good. Mark, do you want to reply to that?
Love it. Absolutely love it. It's all about action. You know, we talked about outside of this conversation, we touched on and by no means are we downplaying the work that they do, but somewhere like Andy's Men's Club, Ed, you've experienced it. These creating that safe space to talk is awesome, right? It's allowing people to open up. They feel like they can be vulnerable because they're hearing other people's stories. Similar though to perhaps my experience of working with men who have therapists before they come and see us, is that there isn't a huge degree of action and accountability, and that's where the magic happens. You have to be willing to show up, and you have to respond to what shows up. So I really like what you're saying there, Joe, about vision plus action equals meaning. If you don't mind, I have an idea around it that it comes from an element of curiosity as well. Like if someone was listening to this and they're like, I just don't know what my meaning is or my purpose is. Start off with understanding what you're curious about, right? Not what you're passionate about. There's some really good content out there around this. Naveen Jain 1 talks about how passion is bullshit. Like passion, you can be passionate about something, and then the following week you're like, no thanks. But what are you curious about? So when I heard that, it made me think of my childhood, right? And what was I naturally, because I really like how we've talked around this going back to being what's natural, right? Or human. And before the pressures of society, or perhaps or inheriting other people's beliefs, what were you curious about as a child? You know, whether it was climbing a tree or playing something or building something. That's it. Look, if you were to go back and explore that, right? Reflect on that. I guarantee you would find some curiosity, which would then ultimately would lead to a form of purpose and meaning in your life. If you were to bring that back, it's this notion of playfulness. I feel most men that I speak to have lost their sense of playfulness, and that's a state for us.
Yeah, I think might have lost Mark for a bit there. I think in terms of that playfulness, I kind of call it like going back to the future, and that will resonate for people that have seen the film. But like, so I think going back to marriage as an example, like guys get settle down, get together with a girl, they maybe get married, and marriage is defined as a voluntary union of man and women to the exclusion of all others, right? But what I think sometimes the modern marriage becomes mired in this kind of, right, man and woman get together, they husband sacrifices some of the stuff that made him who he was, wife sacrifices some of the stuff that made her who she was, and they kind of go off on this kind of like train track, and this kind of notion of soulmates muddies the waters a little bit here as well. So they both give away a little bit of themselves and sacrifice until they get about a decade or so down the line. They're like, he's thinking, well, who the hell am I? She's thinking, well, who the hell am I? She's probably still got a good social network of friends. He hasn't, because he stopped seeing his friends. So when marriage breaks up, he's extremely isolated, as you guys both know. But sometimes with relationships, I say to guys that, why don't you try going back to the future a bit? And they're like, what do you mean? Like, when your wife met you, there was something that attracted her to you. And I guarantee that it's because you had your own interests, you had your own hobbies, you were passionate about certain things, and you were going somewhere and you were doing something, And I'm not saying that guys need to go back to kind of reliving their youth, but like, for argument's sake, I don't know, if you were into playing the guitar, go and grab a guitar and start playing the guitar again. If you enjoyed, I don't know, going to the Grand Prix with your mates, once a year, go to a Grand Prix again. Okay. And this isn't about reliving your youth. It's about giving you back, like you said, Mark, about that playfulness. It's about giving you back yourself, because then when you give yourself back yourself, then again, your wife gets the man back that she first married and fell in love with. And guys kind of lose this in marriage.
I was
they
just
lose
going to say, I
themselves.
think they become maybe there's a bit of complacency, and we get comfortable, we're getting looked after, we're nurtured, we become a bit, we sit on the sofa too much, and we lose track of being the maybe the person that was hungry for life that when we met our partners. And I don't know whether that's the same with women. I don't know. Maybe again, it's massively stereotyping. But I mean, again, what is the message here? The message is to invest in yourself, to find the things that you enjoy, to invest in yourself first, so the relationship becomes about two people moving forward as strong individuals, and then obviously communicating really well in between as you go through that journey. And one thing I just picked up about as the man is coming on your walks, is going through his coaching journey, is trying to resolve his own self-discovery and get on his own journey, I would imagine it's pretty important. And I don't know many women that wouldn't really support any man investing in himself, getting therapy, going to the gym, taking time out, going away on his own for the weekend to explore what he really means to himself. I
Yeah.
don't know many women that wouldn't support that. So is there anything you want to add to that, Joe, in terms of a man communicating to his partner or his family or whatever, like being open about this vulnerability that I want to change because I think there's more?
I think women want their men back. And that's a very bold statement to make, but I think women have lost their men. I think in the modern world, women have lost their men. And what was telling was that Mark was obviously tagged in on one of my posts on Facebook promoting the hike. It was really an eye-opener for me, the amount of women that were tagging their husbands and partners in and saying, hey, look, this would be good for you. What was even more eye-opening was the amount of guys that weren't taking the bloody hint. But that's a whole other story, and you could do a whole podcast on that subject.
But is that because, sorry to jump in, is that because their wives are telling them? If their mate told them, would it be a different response, do you think?
Yeah, and I think again, it comes back to this: not pulling the ripcord on your parachute.
Holding up the mirror. Holding up who's holding up the mirror, right? Is it the wife? Is it a friend?
I mean, does my wife know best? Sometimes she does, sometimes she doesn't. I mean, but I think it does kind of, like, to me, if my wife tagged me in on something, I'd be like, I don't know, if she tagged me on it 15 years ago, would I listen? Probably not. Would I now? I probably would. But I think it's just a very interesting. I just found it a very interesting observation that that the sheer amount of guys being tagged in on it, but also more worrying the amount of guys that weren't kind of taking the hint. Fortunately, there was enough of them that did take the hint. But
I can only throw it, and knowing in my own circumstances, this inability to self-reflect, not feel criticized, know that your partner is wanting the best for you, and it's done out of love. And many men, myself included, would have looked at it and gone, like it's a competition kind of thing, right? It's like they don't really want to. A man who's not conscious will not possibly take that feedback from a place of love. They'll see it as possibly a criticism, or and that's the whole ball and chain, the nagging wife. And these are men, and I was that man, who don't respond and receive that tagging into that post as support and love. It may be construed as, oh God, why am I being told to do this again? Isn't what I do good enough? And let's be honest, there's a lot of that in society. And I guess for men listening to this, when your partner is throwing these things out, receive it with the way that it's meant. It's not that she's saying she's perfect, but suggest to her something, or if you're gay, you're him. Suggest to your partner some things proactively that they may benefit from, as opposed to waiting for your partner to be suggesting things out of love that you're taking maybe as intrusive or whatever. So
it comes back to it comes back to ego as well, I think, Ed, because I think like going back to the men's when I joined the men's mastermind, I had to show up each week and explain whether I'd done the stuff that I'd said I was going to do. And I had 10 other guys staring at me down the screen, and they would call me out if I'd not done the stuff that I said I was going to do. And that's quite a sobering experience. And once you've done that and you get used to parking your ego at the door, it becomes like a learned thing that you. So like one of my jobs in the morning is to clear the dishwasher, right? And I'd not done it for a couple of mornings because I'm a lazy git, like some guys are. And my wife called me out on it, and my brain was whirring away like a hamster wheel, coming up with every justification and every rationalization that I'd come up with to come out with some bullshit excuse as to why I hadn't done it. And it was annoying the hell out of me. I walked into the lounge, took a few deep breaths, and I was like, I could feel it happening, you know. And I walked back into the kitchen. I said, "Look, you're right. I didn't do it. I should have done it. I will
Well done.
I will do it." But you have to reach a level of awareness. And I'm not saying this in like a real winky wanky guy, like, oh, I'm so much better than everyone else. What I'm saying it in is insofar as I have been through that experience, and you have to realize when your brain is playing tricks on you and getting you to come up with bullshit excuses, you know, one after the other, and just say, it's a fair cop. I'm not going to make any excuses. I didn't do it. I will do it. That's it.
Because you know, I suspect, Joe, that by doing that, you are showing compromise, communication, empathy, listening, and you want to invest in that relationship, and you know that that's needed for your partner and ultimately for a harmonious life.
Yeah.
Because the alternative of ignoring it, snapping back, you know, getting into this kind of, and I see this quite a lot with people who are sniping and bickering. It's just that inability to accept that you've got something wrong. Second, you need to apologize. Thirdly, that you can be vulnerable, drop the ego down, and just behave in a way that's more conscious, right? Because it's not about who's right or wrong. It's about the fact that your wife has said something that's obviously irritated her, and you just need to listen. And I'm terrible at this. Just need to listen and acknowledge it, even if you don't agree to it, right? Because it's a feeling that she's got that. And I find that a lot of relationships go through these cycles where people are not listening to that complaint because they're tired or they don't think it's relevant, and that builds up over time. That if these things are not resolved as you go, eventually it'll be the death knell to that relationship, because it's this continual lack of being listened to and appreciated and understood. And that's something we hear a lot in feedback from women, that they're not resolving bickering as you go through the life. And then you're waiting until it becomes like this, I'm so fucked off with A or B, because it's just become, let's use the word toxic, but it's exhausting. So the acknowledgement of the small things, it's got to be on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, I think, isn't it? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, and when you're flaky, when you confirm your own flakiness, it reinforces how shit you feel about yourself. Like in our group, you know, it's a free group, but the expectation is if you miss hikes, then you'll be removed from the group, right? And one of the things that sometimes causes a little bit of contention in the group is when we talk about guys making excuses. And for sure there will be cases where, you know, there's been an emergency or something's come up or people can't make it along and whatever. But the reason we make a big deal about excuses is because I know, and a lot of the guys on the hike know, that when we're feeling shit about ourselves, when we're feeling a bit down, all we want to do is isolate, withdraw, not go and do the stuff that we know what's good for each other. And we will come out with bullshit excuses like the cat ate my homework, or I'm washing my hair, or something like that. And it's a smokescreen, because it's not the real excuse. The real excuse, the real reason is, I'm feeling shit about myself. I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to be around anyone. And we know that, you know. But the problem is when you buckle to that, and then you say you're getting these thoughts of, I don't want to be around people. I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to do anything. And then you don't do it. It creates a negative feedback loop of feeling shit about yourself. And so when we're giving guys a hard time about bullshit excuses, we're not doing it from a place of, oh, I'm going to be an asshole and give you a hammering about bullshit excuses. We're doing it from a place of, We know that when you let these bullshit excuses take hold, they are going to drag you down and down and down and down and down and make you feel shit about yourself. Come out, you feel a bit shit to begin with, but I guarantee you, once you're out in the fresh air chatting, after an hour, you'll be like, you know, what was all the fuss about? And sometimes it's a case with guys that you have to be cruel to be kind in some respects. And that's a hard thing for people to get their head around sometimes. And here.
Great. Mark, I'm conscious of time. It's 5 to 8 here. Not that that's relevant to people watching this. Maybe we should kind of draw this to a 5-minute close.
Sure.
Mark, do you want to jump in here with any sort of comments? Maybe moving towards some conclusions, or?
Sure. Couple of big things that stood out for me there while I was listening. Once you understand the basic human need of wanting to be heard, that someone else just wants to be heard, it's an absolute game changer, right? You can't talk sense to a barking dog. So if somebody is not feeling heard and you fall into victim mentality and you want to get your point across and you want to get your ego across, there's no exchange of energy, positive energy there. You're not listening. Everything's closed up. So anyone listening,
Come back, Mark. Come back.
I'm back.
Yeah, you're back. Okay.
Back. So proactively work on learning that people just want to be heard. That person that is trying to tell you something, listen. Put your ego to one side, right? Imagine it's this little dog at your heels, it's yapping away. Just tell it to be quiet for a sec and give that person the space to be heard. The second point is absolutely brilliant. This notion of holding men accountable to a performance, right? I have definitely been guilty in the past. I'm naturally adaptable, flexible. I try to disassociate myself with a number of things because otherwise it causes me pain. So I try to disassociate from timings or deadlines and things like that. And it's about somebody else holding you accountable, right? And what I see, or what would be a wicked progress perhaps for yourself, Joe, and you probably maybe already exploring this, is about how do you build in society a group of men that are willing to open their hearts, hold the mirror up to other men, hold them accountable to their vision, and hold them accountable to the actions that they have agreed to take in line with their vision. That is what I'm looking to build with whoever wants to get involved.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Beautifully
Yeah.
articulated, Mark. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Accountability, vulnerability, communication, dropping the ego down. And I think we've talked, just to sum up from me, I mean, we've touched a few times on this need for change, this growth mindset. And I think what's really interesting is when you're in victim mode, which a lot of us are when something bad happens, we can't see that there's a growth mindset. We can just feel hurt, and we can feel aggrieved about the divorce, and we can feel aggrieved about things that she's done or he's done. And it's that shift in, isn't it? It's that shift into accountability, and I can control these things, and I'm going to go from victim to growth mode. And with all due respect to people at Andy's Man Club, you can very clearly see the people that are sitting as a victim of things, and the people who've had that shift, that kind of moment where they go, you know what, I'm sick and tired of my own shit. Is something I read on Instagram recently. You know, you've had enough of it when you become sick of your own things. So I think absolutely great comments, Mark. I think, can we build a community of men who know they need to change, who know they're flawed, who know that they can be accountable, and they can set purposeful visions that they can stand up to. I think that's got to be a great, that it seems like all three of us are trying to nudge that forward for ourselves and other people. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my closing comments, apart from to say, Joe, what a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. You've
That's all
given
right.
some really insightful pointers and advice, actually, and some insight I've really learned from. So thank you for your time. Do you want to just, I don't know, close with some comments about how you see your future and the future for what you want to do in men's work, maybe in your own position?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I've reflected on this quite a lot recently, and one of the things that I see kind of a lot in the manosphere is a lot of kind of balls to the wall, big characters, big dick energy, where it's all very kind of high energy, high this, high that, and one thing
Talking
I've
about
noticed,
men's coaches kind of thing.
yeah, in the men's coach and in the men's space and stuff and that,
Yeah.
and what I've noticed as well is a lot of them aren't what they claim to be, and they're not who they claim to be. And there is kind of, I've seen a few cases where guys have kind of the the wheels have come off the cart in terms of this mask and persona that they're putting out online, particularly online, because I see it the most online. And I think in terms of what I want to do, I think there's there's a really strong case for actually having guys that have lived a bit of life, have got some real life experiences, who are on their own journey, who can share that journey with other guys, um, and that can share knowledge and information, and actually strategies that actually kind of work. And we touched upon this in our conversation a bit earlier on. There's a lot of fluff around relationships and self-development and all the rest of it at the moment, and I think that a lot of the tactics and the strategies that really do work and really do move the needle get lost where, podcasts are great and stuff, but there is so much information that it becomes so overwhelming, and a lot of guys get information overload. I think there's two things. I think we need to try and simplify this stuff a lot more to make it a lot easier for guys to apply, and to be held accountable on it. But also, I think it should be fun. Like a lot of the self-development stuff is such a bloody grind, and it's all about, grinding this out and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and doing this and doing that and whatever. And it just becomes a grind. And again, and it's a should. Again, it's coming back to like shoulds. People are doing it because they feel they should, because some dude in in California who's got like a load of servants. He's getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he's had his breakfast made for him, and all this kind of stuff and that. And he's got a 4 hour morning routine. Guys, just do what you want to do and what works for you, not what works for some guru on the West Coast of America, because a lot of the people in the self-development space are putting on an act, they're putting on a mask. It's not real. Um, they're not living the lives that they espouse other people should do. And a lot of the time, under the surface, there's a lot of cracks. So just be real, be yourself, and find what works for you. Enjoy your journey of self-development and self-discovery, and have fun doing it and share it with other guys. That's kind of what I want for Guild of Dads, and you know, I get good feedback from it. I get wives and partners message me to tell me the impact it's had on their husbands when they've come out on the hike and stuff, and how he's different for the rest of the weekend after it, and that's what
awesome.
kind of motivates me. So
Brilliant. Wonderful. Joe, where can people find you?
My website is joehorton.me. You can check me out there. I'm on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram anymore because I've had enough of that. But yeah, you can check me out on Facebook. The podcast is called The Joe Horton Show. There's, like I said, there's about 80 episodes on there now. There'll be something for you. If you heard me talk about Robert Glover, there's an episode on there with him. If you're interested in relationships, I've also interviewed a guy called Athol Kay, John Gray, the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And if you want to get really saucy, I've interviewed Tracy Cox, the sex author, as well. So,
Wow.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Sounds good. Ed, thanks for the brilliant questions. Joe, thanks for your insight and sharing how you view the world and your experiences. Ed, do you want to say some final words?
No,
And
no.
do you-
Yeah, I can do. Just thank you very much, Joe. Really enjoyed that. Great conversation. I could have spent hours talking about this stuff. I very much look forward to coming on a walk. If you can invite us, I'd very much like to attend. And yeah, see you soon, man. Thank
Right
you.
on. Cheers,
Awesome.
guys.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, guys.
All right.